now joined by GeneOdom, longtime bodyguard for the great LYNYRD SKYNYRD. How are you today, Gene?
Still above ground, buddy. Still kicking.
Well, I love it. That's a great thing, and we love to hear about your story and, of course, all about your book and hopefully a forthcoming movie and all that. If you could take us back, though, to the early stages. You know, when did you meet, Ronnie Van Zant and LYNYRD SKYNYRD, and how did you come about to become employed by them?
Well, Lord have mercy, it goes back to the 49, the late 40, 49, 50s. Me and Ronnie were raised up on the same side of town, on the west side over there. Actually, the address for their house then was Mull Street, and I lived 2 or 3 houses down on Mull Street.
And this is in Jacksonville?
Jacksonville, Florida, on the west side.
Okay.
Yep.
So you grew up around Ronnie.
Oh yeah, we played ball together, fished together, rode bicycles together, fought together, and just grew up together.
Oh wow! So at what point did you start seeing him, form local garage bands and start to play in the bars and all that?
Good Lord, probably 60s, 64. Let me speed this up a little bit for you.
Sure.
First off, he wanted to box. He wanted to be a boxer because back then Cassius Clay, which he changed his name to Muhammad Ali, Ronnie was crazy about him.
Right.
And the way he fought, but no boy in the neighborhood, Estes Godwin, boxed Ronnie's ears up real good for him. So that changed the tune about wanting to be a boxer.
Mm-hmm.
So then in high school, he wanted to be a running back. He wanted to have that ball, wanted to run, and practice one game. Had a scrimmage game. He got the ball, was tackled, and broke his ankle. And that they had to put pins in it, so that made him a 4F, so he couldn't be drafted to the Army. Shortly after that, him and a couple of friends, I didn't go on that trip, went to see the Rolling Stones. And when he came back seeing Mick Jagger and that dancing Mick would do on stage, Ronnie Van Zant's mind was made up. He was going to be a singer. And from then on, he started putting the band together. I think Gary was the first one he got. Then Larry Junstrom was at the Lee High School with Gary. And Ronnie had left about 65, right before LYNYRD SKYNYRD became the coach there. That was Ronnie, and then he needed a drummer, and so we was playing ball one day, and Ronnie hit a line drive and hit Bob Burns in the back, and then found out that Bob Burns was the drummer, and me and Bob had been friends since the early 50s also. And then he needed that other guitar player, Alan Collins, and one day Alan was riding a bicycle, and Ronnie, and I forget who was with him, hollered at him, and Alan threw his bike down and ran. A couple of days later, I passed by. Alan was playing in a little band called the Mods, and they were playing baseball. I told Ronnie, I said, "Hey, Alan Collins is playing ball down the street." So me and Ronnie went down there and kidnapped kidnapped Alan off the mound and made him a member of the LYNYRD SKYNYRD band. So that was the nucleus: Ronnie, Gary, Larry Johnstone, Bob Burns, and Alan Collins.
So now, obviously, LYNYRD SKYNYRD was their high school gym teacher?
Yes, and Ronnie, like I said, Ronnie had left because he had got his first wife, Nadine, pregnant, and he left school and got married and had a child. And I think.
And he was how old?
Timmy was born in July of '67, about a month or two.
So Ronnie was what, 16, 17 years old?
Yes, he was. Well, go from January 1948 to 1966. How old was he?
Yeah. He was still a minor.
Oh, he's still a minor. He was still a kid, but he was a grown man at that time.
Right.
And he went to work at his brother-in-law's place, and he was rehearsing, and they were playing little juke joints, fraternity parties, and I'd drive them some places, and they'd get so drunk, they couldn't drive back or anything. I'd have to go with them to bring them back. And he started putting that thing together with the band, and Alan and Gary, I believe, and Bob Burns. A lot of the places they wasn't old enough to play in, the bars, so they had to get special permission from their mother and dad so they could be in the bar because they wasn't old enough to be in there. And they played like that, went on like that, and after they got up, traveling around a little bit, Atlanta, playing a lot at Finocchio's at the Atlanta Underground, and that's where they were. Al Cooper.
Al Cooper saw him. Well, tell us a little bit about the name, because obviously LYNYRD SKYNYRD is a very unique but unusual name. You had, like you say, the Mods and the Rolling Stones and the Box Tops. I mean, these were common names back then.
Well,
what was it about their gym teacher? I know he used to hassle them for getting their hair cut, and I don't know if that was Gary or Alan or who would get ribbed for the hair and chastised. But tell us, if you can, any stories about the evolution of the name, and did they get any resistance to a name as strange as Lynyrd Skynyrd?
I'll tell you exactly how they came up with it. When they first started, I think they called themselves My Backyard, and then they had throw the name around, Conquer the Worm, a worm in a tequila bottle, and then they called themselves the Pretty Ones, and then the 1%. And the reason they called themselves 1% is they figured they had 1% chance of ever making it, and so they were tossing around trying to find a new name. And a song came, and Lynyrd Skynyrd, Coach Skynyrd, was giving Gary Rosington hell because Gary wouldn't keep his hair cut. And you had to put your belt in, you had to wear a belt, you had to wear socks, you had to wear your hair 2 inches above your ears and coat shirt tail in. And Coach would send Gary down to the principal because Gary wouldn't get his hair cut. And Coach was giving Gary hell. A song came out called Camp Granada. I don't know if you remember it. Hello, Mudder, hello, Father.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, in that song there was a lyric that said, Lynyrd Skynyrd got ptomaine poisoning last night after dinner. And they went, wow, listen to that Lynyrd Skynyrd, that's the name. And so they changed the name from 1% to Lynyrd Skynyrd because of the coach giving Gary hell, and they heard that lyric in that song. The name Lynyrd Skynyrd was in that song, and that's how they came up with the name Lynyrd Skynyrd, because of this. Gary wanted to make fun of Coach's name because Coach gave him hell, and the song, so they tied it all together and changed the name to Lynyrd Skynyrd.
So the name obviously stuck for them. It kind of enhanced their rebellious attitude, like we're not getting our hair cut, we're not conforming to society. But did they get any resistance early on? Like it was hard to spell, it was hard to pronounce. What the hell is Lynyrd Skynyrd?
Well, when they first did it, they spelled it LYNARD. SKYNARD. They spelled it like that briefly, but then they changed it. And the reason for that is because Lynyrd Skynyrd, Coach Skynyrd, wanted Gary to keep his hair cut. Back then, if you had your hair short, you was called a skinhead. Not like today, of course.
Right.
And so Gary said he wanted me to be a skinhead, so they rhymed Skynyrd, skinhead, with Skynyrd, and Lynyrd Skynyrd. That's how they changed the name to respell it around the town. Wanted to be a skinhead, and that they tied it all together to the name.
Wow.
And
so obviously the band started evolving, going up to Atlanta to play. What are some of the first cities they would travel to?
Well, they traveled to Savannah, Georgia. They traveled to different towns in Georgia, different towns in Florida, Gainesville, different colleges where they could play at fraternities because they hadn't hit the big time or anything yet. And then they kept running back forth to Alabama, record a song here, record a song there at Muscle Shoals. And they run back and forth, and they play a little bit in Alabama. They play anywhere they could get a gig, and most of the time it was colleges because college would pay you $150, $200, whatever it was back then. It wasn't a lot of money. And they could go up there and play and have a good time and get drunk and come on back home. But Ronnie was working, and Alan was in school, Gary was in school, and Larry graduated. He was in school. But the boys were in school, except for Ronnie. And I forget when Gary left school, and I think Gary Rosington might have graduated. I can't remember, but they were going to school, so they had to be home during the week, and they'd run to fraternity parties and stuff like that. Anywhere they could get a gig, and still they got to Atlanta and to Underground, and Al Cooper picked them up. Then they started playing some bigger gigs and doing tours around the country.
Yeah, first time I saw them, they were opening for the Jay Giles Band. I saw them in the Cincinnati Garden. I didn't know who the hell they were, but they had the giant Confederate flag across the entire backstage.
Yes, sir.
And I immediately loved the soulful playing and singing. And, of course, the first album had just come out. And, of course, people were starting to hear about Freebird, of course, was always their closer. But obviously they held their own with Jay Giles Band. And, from then on, I became a real big fan, saw them on every tour. I was living in Dayton, Ohio at the time. I remember the second tour they came through, played a theater with Elvin Bishop Band opening. And then I went down to spring break, down to Fort Lauderdale for, spring break with all my friends from Ohio. and I heard LYNYRD SKYNYRD is playing at the Miami Marine Stadium with Charlie Daniels' band. So I hitchhiked. Well, I hitchhiked all the way from Ohio to Fort Lauderdale, but then we hitchhiked down to Miami and went to the Marine Stadium. And I talked to Charlie Daniels recently about that gig, and it was a wild one where people were pulling boats up to the side of the stage. It was a floating stage, and I don't know if you remember that show, but, you know, people were jumping in the water, and Freebird got extra crazy, and I think it was Alan or Gary kicked over a monitor into the water because people were splashing him. He thought he was going to be electrocuted.
Yeah, exactly. I may not have been I may have been overseas in the Army.
Yeah.
But I don't know what year it was. I can't remember.
That would have been their third album. That would have been Nothing Fancy.
Nothing Fancy.
Yeah.
Of course, like I said, I was married in '67. I got married, and I was working iron working. I was a union iron worker.
Okay.
So I didn't make all of the shows, and then I didn't even get with them full time until '76. Ronnie begged me to come on and try to help straighten them out.
So this was for the Street Survivors tour, or when did you come back in the fold?
Well, he got me to be a bodyguard for Mick Jagger and the Stones in '75, and then Ronnie had the same manager. Their manager was tour manager for the Stones, and I learned a lot on that thing. And I called the road manager, Robin, from him, and I told Ronnie about that. So we got rid of the road manager, and then he hired a new one. And so I was working a lot out of town, and of course I wanted to try to pay into my pension. I didn't want to travel around the rock and roll band, not have no pension or nothing. But anyway, and then '76, he got me to go out with him. I was laid off for a while, and then they were going to go to Europe. And I had a union lawsuit. I couldn't make the trip to Europe, so when we came right after January, February, whatever it was, I got back. We went fishing. He said, "Man," he said, "I want you on the payroll. I want you to take care of us." He said, "You're on the payroll." Matter of fact, he said, "I want you to be my bodyguard and try to help me get this shit straightened out." And so that we met a couple of times, and I showed him on paper how he was getting robbed by his management, you know, and merchandising and everything. So I knew all about that, you know, and the merchandising back then was hush-hush. You know,
a lot of cash under the table, a lot of skimming off the top.
Not a lot of cash, millions and millions and millions of dollars under the table. And then I think maybe in the late 80s, union halls and hall managers finally caught on. When I sat him down and told him that his manager and his secretary owned his merchandising business, he didn't even own it. You know, that's when we were going to. Nobody knew it, but just one or two people. That we was going to fire everybody after the fall tour, and all the management was gone, and we was going to bring all the management back to Jacksonville and get a local friend of ours to run it. But Ronnie wanted to manage it, me and him himself. I said, "We don't want to manage it. You will go too busy, but we'll get somebody. We'll take care of it." So, but then 2 days later, you know, the plane crashes and he's dead. So all that fruition never came to.
So it really, in the early days, obviously, Ronnie was a street guy. He was playing music for the fun of it. It was hell raising and whiskey drinking and a lot of bar fights and all that. So knowing about accounting and business and contracts was probably the least of his thoughts at that point.
Oh, bingo, certainly. And you know, you said bar fight stuff. Most of the fights were all among their own self. You know, drug and alcohol induced. Ronnie was a lot of people call him a mean drunk because I never seen him drunk one time around me, and that's why we mean straighten their life up, which I did. I got him off the booze, you know, and everything right before the plane crash, and the dope would have been next. You know, Ronnie said there was a time to play and a time to play, and you know, Billy or Gary, whatever, that would get too shit-faced to play, whatever, Ronnie Van Zant would knock some teeth out. You know, there was time to play, and there was time to play. Don't mix them up. And a lot of their fights, but they had other scraps with other people, but most of it was all internal. Until I took over, and the manager went, "I've never seen these guys like this." GeneOdom, he said, "I've never seen them this organized and this without tearing up hotel rooms." I said, "I don't put up that stuff, buddy. Don't come out my name."
Sure. Well, we obviously, remember the great Alan Collins, and of course Gary Rosington is still the lone wolf out there, and of course he's had his recent heart troubles. Hopefully he's on the mend. But do you have any early stories about Freebird or Sweet Home Alabama? Any of the classics being written, or what they're written about, or any circumstances around those?
Yep. Let's just go back with Freebird. And I understand that's probably the second most requested rock and roll song of all time.
Yeah, right behind Stairway to Heaven.
First, sometimes it goes from first to second, second to first, back and forth. But Stairway to Heaven, right? They had Alan Collins had wrote the music for Freebird, but not the blazing fire on the end of it. They just had the initial music, no words for it. And Alan would play it, and then one day they didn't have any lyrics, and so one day Alan was home, and his wife, Kathy, was his childhood sweetheart. She was fixing supper one day, and she wrote on a napkin, "If I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me?" And she leaned over and handed it to Alan across the couch. Alan Collins read it, and he went, "Man alive." He picked the phone up and called Ronnie. He said, "Get over here right now, quick." Ronnie thought something was wrong. Ronnie runs over to Alan's house. Alan shows Ronnie the lyrics. "If I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me?" Kathy just wrote this and handed it to me. So Ronnie sat on the couch, and Alan Collins and Ronnie Van Zandt wrote the rest of the lyrics for Freebird right there. And then he added on the blazing trail end of it. And in the clubs, when they played it, before he put the blazing end on the end, it didn't get that much kick-ass notoriety. But when he put that fireball on the end of it, that's when the fans started liking the load, and that's when the song became a hit. And that's the true story behind Freebird.
So it was a great song, but it wasn't until they got the dueling guitars and just the blazing leads, kind of like Layla or one of those songs, that really endeared them to the classic level.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other those early songs you remember being kind of formed that became some of their all-times?
Sweet Home Alabama. Like I told you, every time they could get an extra $100 or let's just say $100 in a bottle of whiskey, and they wanted to record the song that they had wrote, they would run up to Muscle Shoals. Fortunately, between some of them places, they could pick up a gig, and then they'd run to Muscle Shoals, and they spent a tremendous amount of time running back and forth to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And so Ed King was sitting around with that don't, and just had that lick. That's how you come up with something. So Ed and Ronnie sat down with that lick, and then Ed and Ronnie wrote Sweet Home Alabama because Alan came up with that. Ed King came up with that lick, boom, boom, Alabama lick, and then Ronnie sat down and they wrote the songs for it. Ronnie and Ed King wrote the lyrics to Sweet Home Alabama, and that.
So it was, in essence, it was about their love for Muscle Shoals. That's one of their greatest loves for the state.
Exactly, because they'd run back and forth so much up there recording, and that's how Ronnie started the song, "Big Wheels Keep on Turning, Carry Me Home to See My Kin." I miss Alabama once again because they spent so much time in Muscle Shoals because the Swampers and Jimmy Johnson, the producer, the owner of the place, and he had some great, fantastic studio musicians.
Right.
And that combination is why that Ronnie kept going back and forth to Muscle Shoals. And back then, they didn't have the big money, and they didn't have the big money for that the record label would put up.
Right. So you're doing song by song.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, obviously, one of the most controversial lyrics in that song is mentioning Neil Young, who was a part of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young at that point, who had written a song called Southern Man.
Right.
Any story about what induced Ronnie to write that and what his feeling? Because I understood they were friends later. It was somewhat playful, but what was the story behind that?
Well, I don't know the exact lyric, can't remember it, but he said something about
Southern Man don't need you around anymore.
George Wallace, the governor of Alabama. And I think in Neil Young's song, he had cut down or something, Governor Wallace or Alabama or something, and that Ronnie said, "Southern Man don't need you around anyhow," meaning George Wallace didn't need him around. Ronnie Van Zandt loved George Wallace, and I'll tell you a little secret. When we was in the hospital healing up from the airplane crash, George Wallace sent each one of us a personal letter of condolences about the plane crash. And Ronnie loved him, and that's why he said that, because he liked Alabama, he loved the South, and he liked George Wallace.
So he was defending his territory.
Bingo, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, obviously that first album had so many great songs on it that we still talk about today, and those first 3 albums especially, from Simple Man to Call Me the Breeze, and all that. Give Me 3 Steps, and so many great songs. Yay, and all of that are just.
All their songs were great, man. If you want to see some people get up, you can go to a juke joint or a bar someplace, and everybody's sitting on their fannies. But you hear a Skynyrd song come on, everybody jumps up, especially the women starts dancing. They never did a bad song. All of their songs are fantastic, and they're one of the very one or two or few bands of history that has sell 2 to 3 million copies a year, 38 years after their death. Tell me how many bands you know that sell 2 or 3 million copies a year, 38 years after their death. The Beatles and probably Elvis Presley. That's it.
Exactly. No, the music is endearing. I mean, you know, there were the Allman Brothers. There was other bands down south, but you know, the term Southern rock really, really came into play. You know, when Skynyrd started dominating and had such a great catalog, and you know, all that was flowing. Any other stories about, you know, Ronnie, the person? Because, like I say, we know the one side. We know him on stage, and we hear about, you know, the rowdy behavior. But you know the man growing up. You know, what does the public not know so much about Ronnie Van Zant?
Well, he loved to bass fish. Me and him bass fish as little boys all of our life, all of his life anyway. I'll tell you about the police department down in Jacksonville. You know, way back then when Bulletproof Vest finally came out, they didn't have no money, so Ronnie did a benefit show to make money to get the police officers Bulletproof Vest. And if somebody needed something, I'll tell you what, we was going through Mobile, Alabama. We playing there at the hotel, and we was going to get some breakfast, me and Ronnie, Allen, and Gary. And we was cutting through the park, and there was two homeless guys sitting on a bench there. And we had just got up per diem, which was $20 a day, and we had a pocket full of money. And so as we was walking up, going to a restaurant, one of the homeless guys stepped up and asked us if we had a quarter so they could get some coffee. Ronnie Van Zant looked at me and Gary Allen and said, "Give me your money. Give me your money." And I kind of he said, "Give me the money, Gene." He says, "I'll give it back to you when we get back." And so I gave him my money, and Gary and Alan gave him their money. And so there may have been, good Lord, $1,000. And Ronnie started to hand it to the guy, but when he did, he pulled it back. And Ronnie pointed over his shoulder. He said, "You see that restaurant? You're going in there and you're going to eat first. I'm going to watch you. And then you go next door and you buy yourself some new clothes and some shoes. And then what you do with the rest of the money, I don't care. But you make a beeline for that restaurant." They did. They hauled us over there, and we seen them sit down there and order some food. So we went on and did our thing. But he would do stuff like that, and he was one of the. Did you ever meet him? Probably not.
I did. Yeah, I had the chance of meeting the band several times, and.
Okay, well, then you met the finest man that you ever known. He would do anything for you, and he loved his music, and by God, he got many black eyes fighting for his music and fighting for the sound of it. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you something. Go all the way back to their first album, all the way back to Street Survivors. Yeah. And then there's never been nothing since that. And then after that, Rosington Band did the Rosington album of the flop. Alan Collins' band did his album. It was the best album of Street Survivors. If you hadn't got paralyzed, it would have been a multi-platinum record. And I was in the office when MCA rep called and said, "This is the best album since Street Survivors." Okay, that was the Alan Collins band. Here, there, and back. Okay. Now, they've done many records since then, since Alan Collins got paralyzed. Mm-hmm. So without Alan Collins, you can never, ever achieve the success, the sound of Lynyrd Skynyrd, Inc., period. No matter who you put in the band, you cannot achieve that. And that was Alan Collins. That's the pillars of the music, of the sound of Lynyrd Skynyrd was Alan Collins generated. And if you look back at all the records, you see that without Alan Collins, you don't have that pillars of that music. I know that personally.
Yeah, you could try and replicate and duplicate, but you don't have the raw energy source of it all.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and Ronnie knew that. Ronnie and then when Steve Gaines came on board, that was Ronnie told me a couple of days before the plane crash in Atlanta. Matter of fact, recording the Street Survivors album. Steve Gaines was the best thing that ever happened to that band, and that's the kind of momentum that he brought with him. Mm-hmm. And but Ronnie, man, I could tell you a million stories about him, and they were going to tear the Fox down in Atlanta, Georgia, the Fox Theater, and Ronnie did a benefit show, Save the Fox, and made enough money that the state wasn't going to tear the fox down, and Ronnie Van Zant saved the fox. I could go on and on about stories about him, and go ahead and ask me something else.
Well, I had the pleasure of interviewing Artemis Powell last year, and out of everything he wanted to talk about Lynyrd Skynyrd, he wanted to talk about what a great person that Ronnie was, and that everything he does is to try to keep the legacy of Ronnie Van Zant alive. So
let me stop you right there. 1987, when Ronnie Van Zant's estate had to sue them people to get his money, because I was not only was an eyewitness, I was part of that. I was not part of the tribute band lawsuit, including Artemis Powell withheld Ronnie's estate's money. They want to pay because Ronnie was dead. Judy don't need no money, so Ronnie's estate had to file a lawsuit. And I personally kicked the biggest lawyer in the world's ass in federal courthouse, Manhattan, New York, Jay Goldberg, for Ronnie Van Zant's estate, because now not his brother Johnny, because Johnny didn't have no say so. Johnny was just there playing the music, singing in the band, making a living like a job for Johnny. Johnny wasn't involved in that.
Right.
But those other people, including Artemis Powell, were trying to take Ronnie Van Zant's stock and take Ronnie Van Zant's money, and I put a stop to it in federal court out of Manhattan, New York. So do not believe everything Artemis Powell says. Nowadays it's about Ronnie making money for himself. But believe me, do not believe that, because there is people that knows the truth, and I'm one of them.
Well, I know money, makes people do a lot of crazy things, but
yes,
I just him and many others. I've just heard the great stories of Ronnie as a person, and Ronnie was the heart of the band, and obviously we know him from the music. We know him, touring with the Who, and like I say, Jay Giles band. So many great tours, and then of course becoming the Force. Now I saw him on the Street Survivors tour in Seattle. I know that was fairly early on in the tour.
Yeah.
And I believe the plane crash was probably not more than 4 weeks after that. So I saw the beginning of that tour, and it was an unbelievable show. I mean, like you say, Steve Gaines, Cassie, everybody. The group had stepped it up. What's Your Name, That Smell. I mean, the songs coming from that album were blistering on radio, and they were hitting a whole nother level. So
yes, sir.
Obviously, the devastation that the world heard about the crash was one of the worst news stories we've ever heard.
Yeah, believe me, I know that for sure. But Steve Gaines was a tremendous added asset to that. Ronnie Van Zant saw that right off of the bat, And actually, in the studio up there, I was twiddling my fingers, and Steve was in there playing, and Alan Gary was sitting on the couch. I walked out to Alan Gary. I went, "Hey," I said, "that old Okie right there's kicking y'all's ass." I said, "Y'all got to tighten up now." I was putting a knot in y'all. And he went, "Hey man, don't be talking like that." I said, "Listen," I said, "look at that there." I said, "That guy right there is smoking, and y'all gonna have to tighten up." So anyway, they did, and Steve Gaines brought that to Alan and Gary, brought that extra, kick ass, because Ed King was gone. But Steve Gaines was such a monster musician, singer, songwriter. When he sang his song, good Lord, I can't remember. I've lost the name of it. Anyway, when Steve Gaines took the center stage and sing his song, right, Ronnie Van Zant would walk behind the amp line and give Steve Gaines the whole stage when Steve Gaines sang that song, and it would have been a tremendous asset if the plane hadn't crashed, of course, but if Steve Gaines would have lived, and if that devastation would have never happened, the sky would have been the limit for him with the talent that he brought to him.
Sure. And what about Billy Powell? Obviously, the keyboard, the piano was a great part of Freebird. A great foundational part of Skynyrd. Any stories about Billy?
Yeah, well, when Billy first came in the band, he was Leon Wilkinson's roadie for Leon's bass amp and bass guitar stuff. Billy was his roadie for, I guess, a couple of years. And like I told you, they had the music for Freebird, guitar stuff like that. So Leon kept telling Ronnie that Billy was a good piano player. So Ronnie, Anyway, so Leon had told Billy to, hey, play with Freebird, see what you can come up with Freebird. So Leon, when Billy gets something down, Leon tells Ronnie, said, man, you got to hear this, what Billy's done with Freebird. So Ronnie said, let me hear it. So Ronnie heard Billy's piano parts for Freebird. Boom, there he was. He was a member of the band after that.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Incredible.
He went from Leon Wilkinson's roadie to the superstar piano player.
Sure. Well, tell us about your book and, what we can expect in that and why everybody should go pick that up.
Well, the only ones you can purchase is LYNYRD SKYNYRD Remembering of Southern Rock, which Random House published that. Broadway Books published that. You can get that on the Borders bookstore. You can go on Amazon. It's still for sale. And what I'm basing the movie is going to be based on could bleed into that book some, but my first book that I wrote and published it myself, it's called LYNYRD SKYNYRD, I'll Never Forget You. And I wrote that myself. I don't have an education, and so when Random House liked my story, they said, we got to get you a co-writer because you don't have an education. You don't know how to put periods and commas and all that stuff down. I got an 8th grade education, and I'm proud of it.
Flesh it out.
Yeah, and so my first book, I wrote it myself, and it's just like we're talking on the phone.
Yeah.
And I only printed 10,000 copies, and so Alan Collins convinced me to finish it, and I could sell it on his tour, the Alan Collins Band, when he started that band in '83. And I went ahead and published the book. And right after he started that band, maybe we might have done 5 or 6 or 7 shows. Then he broke that band up, and I had all them books. So over the years, I sold them. And Molly Hatchet, Danny Joe Brown was a very good friend of mine, and so when he found out Alan broke the band up and had all them books, he says, come on out with us, Gene, and sell what you can. So I traveled with Molly Hatchet for about a year and sold them at the clubs and stuff, So I sold them all. And nowadays, if you find one on eBay or Amazon, it's $50, and I've seen them go as much as $700 on there with mine and Coach Lynyrd Skynyrd's autograph in them. But anyway, that book is basically about 2 boys growing up together, me and Ronnie, us young boys fishing together, and then our life, his life, how his life got started, and the music, and then the band, and then that tells about the plane crash, and which LYNYRD SKYNYRD, Remembering the Freebirds of Southern Rock, the new book, tells the story dramatically a lot more precise than my blue book. But I want to base everything on my blue book because it's going to be not only about the music somewhat. It's about me and Ronnie growing up together and Ronnie Van Zandt's life, making it, as boys fishing and working in the auto parts place and working for his brother-in-law, and then him making the big time, then the plane crash. The plane crash, of course, will be, let's say, the money shot because it was so devastating and it's such a horrible, horrible ending for a friend and a rock and roll band. And so that's I've got in touch with this Chappell entertainment guy, and Chappell is trying to he's shopping, he's looking for producers for my life story, the movie, so maybe we can find some producers that's interested in making the movie, and it'll be a great movie. There won't no doubt about it. It's not going to be no sex, drugs, rock and roll stuff because that's been done a million times.
Yeah.
This is going to be the true story about the barefoot country boy Ronnie Van Zandt, and how he grew up and how he became a superstar, and he never knew it. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, the song that Steve Gaines sang co-lead vocals with Ronnie, you got that right.
You got that right.
Yeah, exactly. that was one of the big standouts on.
Well, he sang that with he sang that with co with Ronnie, but there's one song he sang on there by himself.
Okay.
Ronnie walked off stage. You got that right.
Oh, Ain't No Good Life, I think.
Ain't No Good Life. That's exactly right. Ain't No Good Life. He sang that by himself, and when he was singing that, Ronnie would go behind the amp line and give him the full stage. That's the kind of gentleman Ronnie was. Ronnie wasn't worried about Steve Gaines taking the stage. Ronnie Van Zandt gave Steve Gaines the stage to sing that song out of respect.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And let me tell you about the Willie Nelson, about kicking ass.
Yes.
Willie Nelson and Picnic in July 3rd. I said 2nd and the 4th was in California, and the 3rd we flew out for Willie Nelson Picnic. And Skynyrd opened up, did the show, and it was scheduled for no encore. 93,000 people. Skynyrd kicked their ass and left the stage. I put them in limousines. They were gone. In 45 seconds, they were off the property. And so everybody was hollering for Freebird, Freebird, Freebird. 93,000 people hollering for Freebird. Encore, Freebird, and so Skynyrd came out. So they started tearing they run the security people completely off. I mean, I'm telling you about gone, and tore the PA down, tore over the monitors, tore the barricade down, and so I had to do something. So I run out in front of the stage and got the microphone. I said, listen, I'm GeneOdom. I'm Ronnie Van Zandt's bodyguard, personal friend, security for the band. I said, they're back at the hotel right now, fans. I said, they was not scheduled for an encore. It's not their fault. I said, y'all take it easy and give these guys a break. So anyway, they did. They backed up. The whole crowd backed up, let the people build the stage back and do all the stuff, you know. So when Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings came out, and they were probably about 45 minutes late, they came out, and first thing Willie Nelson said was, damn, that's going to be a hell of an act to follow there, buddy. They kicked some butt, didn't they? And the crowd went crazy. Yes, sir. Ronnie Van Zandt and his gang beat the hell out of Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings that day.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, we're certainly excited about your book. We're going to encourage everybody to go check that out. We're going to say a prayer and hope this movie gets made. Love to hear more about your life story. And obviously Ronnie and Lynyrd Skynyrd's music lives on. I think we're going to be listening to it 20, 50 years from now, you know, just like the rock and roll classics. You know, so many countless bands have been influenced, you know, by Ronnie singing and the bands playing and their songwriting. What do you hope that people hold dear in their hearts the most, you know, when they remember Ronnie Van Zandt?
What kind of guy he was and what kind of music he left behind, you know. And he was special. He wasn't, like I told you, he never knew. I took him out in the audience one time, and there's 70,000 people. He didn't want. He said, "I can't go out there." I said, "Come on, man, leave your hat in here." I said, "Most people see you, you're about an inch tall." And I said, "Come on." We walked out through the crowd and checked out. They just came out with some new merchandise. That's what it was. He wanted to see the merchandise, and we got all the way back to the back door before anybody recognized him. He said, "I can't believe that." I said, "Listen, I'm telling you, you don't do anything crazy out there to identify who you are. Most people ain't gonna recognize you until somebody recognizes you." And I said, so he couldn't believe it. I took him right through the crowd of the people, and I said, "Just come on, follow me," you know. But he was he loved it. He loved entertaining the people. He didn't have no like most singers have, or some musicians, attention deficit disorder, adult attention deficit disorder. He didn't have that. He just had charisma, you know, and barefooted. And the reason he wore barefooted, he wanted to feel the stage when it burned. And he was just such a unique, fine human being. And I wished everybody in the world would have got to meet him.
Well, it certainly changed my life, and I try and live a good life and inspire others like he did. And Gene, it's been a real pleasure. You can go to Facebook and check out Gene's Facebook page. It's GeneOdom's Friends, and that's FRYNDS, as in Lynyrd Skynyrd. So please check out his Facebook. Stay in touch. We're going to spread the word about your book, and Gene, it's been a real pleasure. Look forward to having you back on. Any new updates, and certainly any new books, or certainly the movie.
Well, let me tell you this too. If you have trouble getting the book, you can contact me on my Facebook page, and I can get it for you, and I'll personally autograph that book to you.
Well, we're going to encourage everybody to do that. Gene, it's been a real pleasure. Can't wait to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
What? Anytime. Call me anytime you want to.